NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com. Recorded Future. They help security teams make more confident decisions faster. Recorded Future's technology automates broad collection and analysis of cyber threat data and delivers the rich external context you need to understand alerts and emerging threats. With real-time threat intelligence from Recorded Future, security teams respond to threats 63% faster and find undetected threats 10 times quicker. To get started, go to recordedfuture.com/securityweekly and sign up for the Recorded Future Cyber Daily. Every day, you'll receive an email with the top results for trending technical indicators, cyber news, exploited vulnerabilities, suspicious IP addresses, and more. Subscribe today and stay ahead of cyber attacks. Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs, their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. A couple of quick announcements. We are running a Hacker Halted interview series at the conference in October. If you're attending and would like to sponsor an interview, please submit to our conference request form at securityweekly.com/booking. Select Hacker Halted. If you work for a company and you know you're going to have a presence at the event as part of a sponsorship for your company, it's great reason to bug your marketing team to go to securityweekly.com/booking. You can basically sponsor an interview with us. We record it live at the conference and release it in our shows. It's actually one of the cheapest and easiest ways to get in on the Security Weekly show and get your brand out there. So many of the big East Coast cybersecurity trade shows take place in crowded cities like Boston and New York, where parking's a nightmare and it'll cost you an arm and a leg. However, this year's Compass Security Symposium is being held at Twin Rivers Casino in Lincoln, Rhode Island, just 15 minutes outside Providence. They'll have plenty of free and easy parking. Speakers include social engineering expert Chris Nagy and myself, who's doing the keynote. I'm just giving a talk there. Is it a keynote or I don't know. I'm speaking there. Whatever. Just a talk. Whatever.
Just a talk.
I've been demoted to just a talk.
Maybe had Nagy's the.
Probably had Nagy's the keynote. He's a lot better looking than I am. But use the discount code SW2019. Save $20 on registration. What's missing from that announcement is when is this taking place? It's September.
Yep.
September 25th.
On that date.
Yes.
And it's at a casino.
It's at a casino. Well, it's Twin Rivers. Yep. I mean, it's...
Well, they have sports betting there now.
Casino. Well, air quotes.
Yeah, but you
casino.
Can do this, and you can push buttons, and...
Sure.
Don't they have table games now?
No, it's... Anyway.
Okay. There we go. They got table games.
Richard Melick has spent over a decade advancing through the security industry with his considerable experience and considerable focus on the stories surrounding ransomware, hacking, and cyber attacks. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
It's nice to have you here on the show tonight, and I love the topic because we got, I think, a little controversial I think this is going to be a little controversial, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're gonna upset a few people.
I think so, and I mean they should just then gather themselves back up and go patch some stuff. Is basically
absolutely
my advice. I won't speak for you, because you're representing your employer and all. I mean, I could fire myself if I wanted to, but I'm going out on a limb and just saying, patch your stuff, basically. And that's really so. From my perspective, what I've come down to lately, right? And I spent 7 years working for Tenable. Before that, I was pen tester. Before that, I was responsible for applying a lot of patches. And so, I get a lot of the different aspects that go into when you apply a patch from multiple different perspectives. I'm not saying the world's foremost expert on how you patch stuff, but I've been there in some capacity. And when I look at what's happening today, I'm like, you know what? All those debates that we've had over what criticality should a vulnerability be before we patch it, and what sensitive data is on the system. And like, I understand there's a formula and all that stuff for patching, and we may think about how easy it is. We may think about what types of systems, what types of data, and all those different factors, right? If we have compensating controls and all those things. And I'm kind of like today going like, you know what? Just throw that out the window and just apply the patches, test them before you roll them out.
Yeah.
You apply them to something, test it, and if it passes testing, just push it out. Don't worry if it's for whatever criticality, whether there's even a vulnerability associated with it or not. Because what I've observed over this is like our 15th year doing the show. What I've observed covering vulnerabilities and security for all these years, and as long as, I'm on this earth covering vulnerabilities, what I've seen so far is that there's vulnerabilities, of course, that we don't know about, that attackers in nation states know about. There's vulnerabilities that have been reported, and that's cool. There's vulnerabilities that are misreported, right? There's ones that say this version is not vulnerable to that particular vulnerability when it really is. There's vulnerabilities that come back that you apply the patch and now you can apply another patch. So basically my recommendation is really around, it sums up as like, just apply the patches. Test them, make sure it doesn't break stuff. That's a different thing, right? Business has to run, but just apply them. Don't worry, just do it. And that's one of the reasons why we at Security Weekly, and I'll give you a plug, they're a sponsor and all, but we adopted Automox because I'm like, look, we just need to apply patches. Like, we can't have one of our systems down. Patching is critical to that, not just for vulnerabilities, but we need to make sure our stuff is stable and running and supporting all the latest stuff. So let's just get it patched.
And that would be quite the trophy for somebody to say, oh, I hacked Security Weekly.
And I mean, there's been incidents.
They're coming after you.
And I'm not going to lie, there have been incidents when they are. We deal with them. We talk about them on the show. We disclose them, and move on with life. And my whole thing right now is like, look, we're pushing because largely I've spent the past couple of months developing and building a DevOps and CI/CD tool chain. I'm like, we just need to push forward in everything that we do. Push patches out. If it breaks, push more patches or redact those and push other ones. We just constantly need to be moving forward. So, Richard, and you had what I thought was a good analysis to kind of like bring me down to reality a little bit as well.
Well, I think one, thanks for the plug. I can't really complain about that. If my job is done, you've already talked about it.
We use you guys, and we do, and we have for a long time.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I think what we're running into is it's not just the fact that we are not patching. We in the industry are not patching at a good enough pace. It's the fact that we're dealing with an onslaught of patches, and this onslaught of patches is making us slow down. So we're looking at 14 days until we're deploying out any kind of patch. And what that has done, you brought up Tenable. Tenable recently released some research that said that hackers have 7 days from the announcement of a vulnerability. 14 days from the announcement of vulnerability to get into a system before the patch is out there. On average, it takes them about 10 days to build out the vulnerability, but at most they're seeing around 6 days, and they're able to apply that before the systems are hardened. And you bring up this good point. Do your test, get it out there. It shouldn't be taking 48 hours. It shouldn't be taking 2 weeks to do a test on your systems. If you've done proper inventory control, if you know the systems that you have, if you know the products that you have, if you know what's going to break. We all know Java's going to break when you update it. We all know Flash is going to break when you update it. Right. We know that's going to impact something. If you know that, take the necessary steps. Have a proper plan in place. If you build out a solid foundation in the beginning, in the end, your job's going to be easier. And that also goes to the side of once you start to automate the easier stuff, you can focus on the more difficult stuff. You don't always have to automate JavaScript. You don't have to automate Flash. But you want to get to a point where you're automating as much as you can, including the testing procedures, and then getting your network secure, your infrastructure for secure.
Now, Richard, I want to go back to having a solid foundation, because I think that in IT, and it's, bear with me, it's a terrible analogy, but it's going to make sense. We're building like multiple houses, right? Some of our houses were built a long time ago, right? So that foundation's been built. We've built on top of it.
And essentially what we need to do is we need to tear it down and we need to restart and rebuild, and that takes time, right? We think about renovating a house or whatever. Again, it's not a great analogy, but when we go build something new, right? Like if I had to take the, let's say, application I'm working on now and rebuild it from scratch, I would do it completely different. And I would have a really awesome foundation with the tools and technology I have today. I think the one of the really huge problems we deal with today is we're not always building a house from the ground up, right? We got a house and we got to keep renovating it. And at the same time, we all have to live in it together as well.
Yeah.
And that's hard. When I'm building a new house, no one's living in it, and it's a lot easier. So I guess in that sense, my analogy makes sense. You kind of get where I'm going at that. Like some things are going to move faster because we're building new. Other things are going to take longer because we're building on top of an existing foundation that could be complete crap as well.
Yeah, and you bring up a really valid point. You and I have been in this industry. Everyone on this show has been in this industry long enough to know that 15, 20 years ago, the technology that we're working with today was barely a blip on somebody's mind.
Agree.
Maybe being thought about. But what we're dealing with now is advanced technology, and the more technology that comes out there is the bigger of a target that you have on your back. But if you are not focusing on at least maintaining your foundation, even if you've been around for 20, 30, 40 years, you have to focus on your foundation. And that can even go down to the foundational controls that you're implementing. I love the CIS guide. The first 6 guides is, do inventory control and management, understand the software assets that you have, do risk mitigation, vulnerability scanning. Are you monitoring your audit logs? These kinds of steps are the foundational elements that so many groups are forgetting to do. It's like maintaining the foundation of a house. You can tear down a house and rebuild off the same foundation over and over and over again, as long as it is maintained. It could be 200-year-old concrete. That's okay, but it has to be maintained from the very beginning. And if it isn't, you can start to take those steps to implement those procedures to get it up to code, up to a state of security. And that's what we need to get everybody to. So 15, 20 years ago, the IT budgets were small. Companies built it up. The IT team is the team that you only go to when something's gone wrong. Now, they're still dealing with a smaller budget, but they're having to manage. I think the latest research came out that the average security operator is having to manage anywhere between 7 and 10 separate products within their infrastructure. That's insane.
Well, yeah, and Richard, so along that point, in some of the trends I've seen recently are, like, we basically, in all different departments, right, whether you're in a sysadmin, SecOps, DevOps, security, whatever it is, we're managing, like, way too many tools, way too many solutions, way too much software, right? What a lot of us need is not the next greatest, like, AI machine learning, platform that can do all those wonderful things. Like, we need to come down to basics, and along what you said, Richard, right? Like, we need a great asset inventory. We need to apply patches to all of our stuff once we know what we have. And what we need is, like, this basic blocking and tackling type tools and techniques. And all the other fancy stuff really isn't helping us if we're not doing those, like, basic techniques of, hey, whenever I deploy something, it's fully patched before it goes out, and I know what I have. Like, that's just such a basic thing that so many of us, I think, miss, and we go to, like, build these other solutions on top of it, and we're not doing what we term, air quotes, like, the basics, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes down to automation, in my opinion. The only way that we are going to continue to scale up is through automation of the basics. So automating your procedures and policies and your software deployment. This is something that we do a lot here at Automox. It's the foundation of our product is automated cyber hygiene, automated system hardening. And you can apply this patch to this group of machines over here, knowing that it's going to get out there, or hey, you know what, this software needs to deploy out to all these machines, even if they're added new to the infrastructure, whatever it might be. You automate that. Now all of a sudden, not only have you scaled out your security group from not just the SOC or the outsourced MSSP, but you've added your IT team internally as another layer of security, and then from there, the automation side helps to remove a little bit of that workload, allowing your IT people, whoever it might be, to focus on the bigger deals at hand.
Yeah.
If you take care of the easy stuff and you can focus on the harder stuff, aren't you getting better value for your money on the
Well,
employees?
and you need to make the easy stuff easy. I think we
Yeah.
make it way too hard, right? Like when Joff or Patrick comes along for a pen test, if I've really automated and got a solid process for patching my stuff, that's great. Like that provides protection, don't get me wrong, because we still use vulnerabilities. However, I think the real benefit is once that process is flowing along and as stuff is getting built and discovered, it's automatically getting patched and we're dealing with a little bit of fallout that might happen and we're taking care of it, it takes up less time and less resources. That gives us more time to focus on the things that likely Patrick and Joffs of the world are preying upon in our environments, like Active Directory, the configuration, the projects to make sure we're rotating our service accounts, the projects to make sure I have a secrets vault on my apps, all the things that are more configuration related, environment related, rather than vulnerability and patching related. I think there's a huge difference. And we don't get time to focus on that because we're still chasing our tails trying to make sure everything is vulnerability scanned and patched all the time.
Yeah. Oh, so here's the question to you: as let's tap into your pen testing days. If you were to approach an infrastructure, I mean, most likely you're coming in to do pen testing, red teaming, whatever it might be. The first thing you're going to look for is the unpatched vulnerabilities because that's going to be the easiest way in. It's just like locking the doors of your building on your way out. You make sure your windows and your doors are locked. You're not making your building, your infrastructure 100% secure. You're just removing the easy way in. So you as a pen tester, red teamer, wouldn't it be harder for you to find that next vulnerability? Wouldn't it slow you down from getting in if just the basics were taken care of?
Well, I think it depends on the situation. I think certainly critical, easy to exploit vulnerabilities. Joff and Patrick weigh in on this, right? Make our job is pretty easy as a red teamer. I think beyond that, we're abusing the configuration largely in Active Directory. Yeah. But there are certainly some vulnerabilities that are built in there that if they're there, they certainly make things easy. Joff?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. I got to tell you, I go searching for vulnerabilities as almost a last resort. I mean, so much of pen testing is just low-hanging fruit misconfiguration kinds of things that, vulnerabilities is like, I have to admit I'm probably biased by the types of tests I've been doing lately, but
yeah, Joff, I think you're testing people that have largely figured out this problem that Richard and I have described as well, right? I do agree. It's gotten better in a lot of organizations where you might not even bother. You just go for the other stuff rather than vulnerabilities. But there's still, I think, an overwhelming majority that haven't fixed the vulnerability and patching problem.
Yeah, for those that haven't fixed the vulnerabilities, certainly there's a plethora of stuff out there that's already written for you. There's so many frameworks that it's already available that you can just, enumerate said vulnerability and just go for it. I just don't have that particular experience set in my. But
also largely, Jeff, I think you're dealing with Active Directory as well, correct?
I do spend a lot of time doing more internal related stuff that is Active Directory. And a lot of that is more information based. It's more reconnaissance on the directory itself. It's more, misconfiguration based and things that system administrators do that are not right. Entirely. I do run into situations where, and in fact, I had one relatively recently where I ran out of, it was well configured. I ran out of opportunity to get myself any, additional leverage using just misconfiguration. So I went out to, exploit DB and found a 0-day and modified a proof of concept and used it to get local escalation. So
yeah. And I think that's where it's going, right? Because I think you're going to find a way into the app. And for example, we talked on a previous show, right? You're going to get inside of a container now in most modern applications. And then from there, like you're basically searching for vulnerabilities, right? I mean, the configuration is certainly one avenue, but Brandon from Capsulate came on and said, like, look, once you're in a container, it's running on top of the kernel. Kernel exploits are valid. If you're not applying your patches, right, you're screwed. And Richard, I think that ties back into our conversation to be like, look, don't wait until you find that really high critical kernel vulnerability that's remotely exploitable. Now your local vulnerabilities are essentially remote because of your applications. Therefore, it comes down to you got to be patching everything in your environment, essentially.
I think there's also something to be said about, I'm just processing everything that you're saying. I think there's something to be said about the idea that not only are you patching everything, but you're also allowing your EPPs to work smarter. The data gathering, everything else that comes out when it comes to a SOC and they're doing threat hunting or whatever it might be. One of the first checks they're going to do is like, hey, was it this vulnerability that let somebody in? Was it this exploit that allowed somebody to get through this known exploit? And the data continues to show that over 50% of that hacks, according to CISOs that are reporting back, they're saying it came through an unpatched vulnerability, and 35%, don't quote me on that one, I'll have to fact check that, 35% of them, I think, said they knew about the vulnerability but hadn't patched it. And so when you sit there and you're seeing these organizations admitting that these hacks are happening, these breaches are occurring, and the data loss is occurring because of an unpatched situation, there's no reason that we shouldn't be making it harder for people to get around in our network and making it easier for our EPPs to react and to our SOCs.
Yeah, it was actually Apache Struts that Synopsys Black Duck had done the recent research where they looked at every version of Apache Struts that was released, and they looked at every CVE and vulnerability that was released, and they started doing a diff about what version had known vulnerabilities that were publicized, and which ones maybe did not. So basically, in both directions, they found that for an Apache Struts version, it was actually vulnerable to things that had not been documented. They also found that for that same maybe or different Apache Struts vulnerabilities, that they said that they were not vulnerable when they really were. And that comes down to, like, attackers are going to take advantage of those vulnerabilities, like, known or not. Sure, there's configuration, right? But in that Apache Struts case, you got to be patching that stuff. And inside of an application like that, if you're moving into a modern DevOps environment, the longer you wait, the longer you're going to be in technical debt, and the longer that's going to take to fix. If I can fix it earlier in my dev cycle, earlier in the process, that's less code that's being written that's dependent on that version, right? If switching from version 1 to version 2 means I got to change this function call, right? Like Python, for example, Joff, right? Switching 2.7 to 3, like items versus iter items, right, is a huge thing. The longer I leave that 2.7 code around, the more things that are going to be tied to that 2.7 code.
Exactly.
If I upgrade earlier, the easier time I'm going to have making the migration.
But you also bring up a good point. You also are aware that there is a potential criticality of threat there. You have a little bit of a larger target on your infrastructure because you haven't done that upgrade. So you're taking those steps to mitigate that threat. And that's something that kind of goes back to inventory control. Understanding your assets, understanding what you have to take the steps on, what you have to protect. That's one of the biggest things that we're not seeing happen. Audit logs are not being looked at, and they need to be looked at, and they need to be monitored constantly. Not every single day, but have that routine. Check in on there. Make sure that the inventory is there. Make sure the access is happening where it needs to be happening. And that's going to be just those little steps that can help you get to the point, okay, we're not to the version that we need to be at, but we will get there, and we're taking the steps to mitigate anything in the meantime.
Yeah, I think it's very much a blended approach when an attacker comes at your environment, and if they can find a vulnerability to exploit to further their campaign, that's going to happen. And I think Active Directory is somewhat different, Joff, in that respect, where I think there's more configuration vulnerabilities, like air quotes vulnerabilities in that system than there are, that can get you further in certain circumstances than actually patching a vulnerability in the OS itself. That's not to say if you've got like the SMB vulnerability hanging around from WannaCry or other ones, that those aren't going to be detrimental to your security in certain circumstances, no?
Well, there's legacy technical debt that accrues in things like Active Directory that people have a really hard time getting rid of. So that's one thing, and you can't. Most organizations can't say, oh, throw up their hands and go, okay, that's it. We're throwing it all out. We're going greenfield, starting all over again. That's just not tenable. It's not feasible. Right. And so those are the kinds of things you see in those environments, and it's a really heavy lift to move away from some of that technical debt. And I think that's that is something that I think a lot of organizations struggle with, even way beyond the Active Directory space. Right? They struggle with that in many other deployments of servers and services. I think that's where cloud offerings are really helpful because they give you the agility to move quickly. So I'm actually kind of wondering. How Automox and some of the cloud operators and what the relationship that you guys have with that.
Are you talking about like patching of the cloud services like Amazon and such?
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So right now, Automox is focused on endpoint hardening. So we're not, at least at this point, looking at the hardening of the cloud infrastructure. So AWS, Azure, and that. But it's in support of it. So we are a cloud native product. We believe in the cloud in terms of supporting of your own infrastructure, but our main focus is on the endpoints and servers themselves.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if you're controlling the operating system, Richard, you can put an Automox agent on it. You're responsible for patching at that point, right? I spin up an EC2 instance. I'm responsible for patching that stuff. Correct. I can put the Automox agent on it and patch it.
Yeah, you can patch it if you're hosting like a virtual machine offsite in the cloud. But you can apply the patch towards that, but not in towards that. As we're seeing the Chase Bank, was it Chase? No, which bank just got hacked?
Was it Bank of America?
Bank of America did.
Yeah, Bank of America.
Bank of America. As we're seeing, they're getting in through just as database misconfiguration, something that they just didn't do it properly and they weren't storing the data properly. Now, that's not something we are focused on, but if it is something that is patchable on the endpoint side and OS and that can be patched or third-party applications, that is something that we are focused on. Because those are the basics. Those are the easy elements that we often forget, we being the industry itself.
Well, because there's another element to this as well. That I was just dealing with the other day is that, sorry to cut you off, Joff, was working with a system where like half the vulnerabilities were patched, but maybe about somewhere half to a third weren't getting patched. The repos for patching weren't configured right. If we'd had something on there a little more sophisticated that took the configuration of the sources for patching out of the loop, it wouldn't have been so vulnerable. Fortunately, nothing bad happened, but it was kind of embarrassing for the sysadmin. It's like, dude, you didn't do the whole job. Do we run into that? Is that still, that comes under misconfiguration, doesn't it? Something we need to help with? No.
Sorry, say that again, Lee?
I'm saying that comes under, making sure that all our endpoints that are being configured for patching are properly configured to do the whole job. And if we can simplify that configuration, it'd be really nice.
Well, and I think that's where it's going, right? Like, at the end of the day, users are going to have some device that they use to access stuff, and that's going to have to be patched, right? Maybe there's a future where that doesn't exist, but that's maybe a long ways off, right? So we're still going to have some responsibility for patching for the foreseeable future, no? Richard's like, yeah, that's what I'm banking on because I work for a company that applies patching, right?
Absolutely. Fingers crossed that we always have to patch something. It comes down to the configuration. It comes down to accepting that things have changed. Let's go back to the analogy of the foundation. The foundation is established. Let's just keep it as it is. An organization is just as James was saying that we can't take out Active Directory, but you can harden the elements around it. You can start hardening up the training. You can start hardening up the configurations, changing defaults, all that, and then also just automating the other components of it. And all that comes down to a properly trained, properly supported, and properly maintained team. I mean, this gets into the employment side. We're at 3 million IT personnel shortage right now, and that's not going to change. I was talking to the CTO over at Carbon Black which congrats to them, by the way.
That's right. Yeah. Recent news: they were acquired by who was it again? VMware.
VMware, yep.
VMware, $2.1 billion.
Good for
Congrats to them. But I was talking with their CTO, and he goes, if we took every single person that's in school right now to get into IT and put them into the workforce, we would still be 2.5 million people short. We're not going to catch up. So automation is the way that we can augment that. We can supplement that, because it's not going to get easier. We're going to have new technologies come out. 10 years from now, with the conversation that we're having right now, it's going to be completely different, because the technologies are going to continue to evolve, and the need for people to be able to manage and to support that all is going to have to evolve.
But not totally obsolete either, because if you think about it, I think we're always going to have decisions, and I think we kind of think of this in a smaller scale, sometimes not at a larger scale. Really, when we talk about automation and the things that cloud and all those things bring, we're faced with these decisions where we can we can give up some of the control, a lot of the control, and host it in the cloud. We can host it in containers in the cloud. We can host it in infrastructure in the cloud. We can do software as a service. We can do the most extreme form of it, right? Where it's serverless, where it's just my code, right? And my next prediction, Richard, is what happens when it's not even my code? Like I think about what I want to do and it writes my code for me. Like that's the next iteration of what we're talking about, right? We've extrapolated the operating system, the web server, the app server, all the libraries, everything, and I just write my code and I host it in the cloud. Like what's the next iteration of that? I don't know. It's like software without code. I don't know how that even exists, right? But in each stage of this, we're faced with the decision, whether we know it or not, that we give up some control the more like hosting provider focused we are. So when I can take my operating system, I can put it in the cloud, but then I can do, Amazon Light Sail, I can do all these different technologies. And the more kind of down that path you go, the more control you give up. I think that there are some scenarios where we may look at it and say, yes, I want to give up this level of control, and that's fine for this app. But I think there's always going to be apps where we're like, no, I really need to maintain this control. The extreme to that is I'm still going to host it on premise. I'm going to host everything myself. I'm going to pick the hardware, the operating system, the software, and I'm going to write all the code myself, all the way up into like I've just got this bit of Python that's going to run in Amazon AWS Lambda. Richard, you were excited. You were waving your hands. You were excited.
You hit on two elements. One, that's the personal element. I have worked in technology long enough I should be able to trust a cloud, but I don't. I have a 32 terabyte file server in my basement that backs up everything.
Sure. Yeah.
And it is, I'm backing up my cloud files to that file server just to ensure that no matter what happens, I always have access and I always have control. But on top of that, there's something else that you said recently. It doesn't matter how much control we give up to the cloud, we still need that device to access it. And that device has to have some core foundational element that can read the cloud element. It's never going to be codeless. There's always going to be something that has to access it and run that kind of
like Chrome OS is a good example of where we are
Chrome
today.
OS,
of like
exactly.
The slimmest, most ubiquitous kind of OS out there, right? Like, but it's still an OS.
Correct.
It's Linux.
And everything's hosted up in the cloud. But there are still elements. There are still vulnerabilities on those machines. There are still elements that can allow access in. And so that's where we kind of get back to. Even as we continue to automate the elements of our life and we continue to release control of these technological innovations, we also always have to hold on to our fundamentals of security, because the fundamentals are oftentimes the ones that are skipped over, oftentimes the ones that are, it's why phishing still works. It's why compromised websites still work. Password guessing still works, because we haven't enforced, we haven't encouraged, we haven't followed those fundamentals.
I've got a question, and maybe I missed this earlier in your discussion, but traditionally patching cycles with most operating systems, just taking the OS layer for a minute, generally been pretty good, right? They've got their act together. Microsoft's kind of leading the pack, and all the other Linuxes and everything have got their repository solutions that update things and patch them. application layer and Dockerization, application virtualization layer, whole different story. So how's your solution extending up, above the OS layer? How are you playing with all of these various applications that are riding on these operating systems in the solution that you have?
Are you talking more to like the third party, or talking to elements like within Dockers, or like how they're being hosted?
Well, go back to endpoints. I'm talking about your Adobes and your application X. Pick one.
Well, so we have third party software management. So you're able to go in there and see, hey, here's the inventory of your software that you have on your endpoint. Here's the patches that need to be released for it. Adobe's a very good one. Recently, we ran into an element where somebody was running Adobe Flash 7, and that's we won't even go into how vulnerable that makes that organization. But Adobe Flash 7 is, needs to be updated, but it can't just be updated. You actually have to rip and replace it. So what we're doing is we're writing what we call a worklet. It's just a Perl script that, PowerShell script that's going to go out, rip and replace. So if it is found, it is ripped out and then replaced. And then from there, the inventory is updated within the control. And that's how we are. We're not just allowing people just to patch the products that they have, but we're also helping to harden up their system. So we're going to bring that Adobe Flash up to the latest, not as vulnerable version that exists.
But also, Richard, in that scenario, what I found really interesting when I worked in vulnerability management was you could find the vulnerability, patch the vulnerability, and you'd still then go recheck for that, and it would still be vulnerable. And I'd scratch my head and be talking with customers and the internal teams, and like, what is going on? And they're like, well, there was multiple versions of that software installed. The patching process only patched one of those versions. Vulnerability scanner was smart enough to identify that, that version's patched, but that one isn't, right? In the scenario you just described, and knowing what I know about the Automox product, you could script that to say, basically, like, go wipe out all versions of it, regardless of where it lives, and replace it with the most recent version, and basically take that scenario off the table.
We actually had a customer that did that recently. They hired on a new MSSP to help augment the security of their organization. They came in with their own suite, and they had to rip and replace a couple software elements. And doing each piece, or each machine was taking an hour and 15 minutes to do manually. He was like, wait a second, I can script all of this. So he writes up the script. He does a test on his test VM. It works. So he deploys it out to the whole environment. Something sub 300 endpoints, just right under 300 endpoints. Took 2 hours. He was able to replace in 2 hours, something that would have taken 2 to 2.5 weeks for a full-time employee to do. There's that cost savings on there, but that kind of goes back to the CIS controls, understanding your inventory, understanding what's installed in your machine. If you go into your environment and you see, hey, there's multiple versions of Adobe, there's multiple versions of Chrome, there's multiple versions of Flash, get the ones out of there that are vulnerable, because you need to have one. You need to have one secure version. You need to make sure that the other softwares are up to date, working with it, and fix whatever needs to be fixed. But you can script that out. And you don't always have to replace something. Sometimes you're just like, you know what? We are no longer a Chrome shop. Everybody's already using, Edge or whatever they're calling it, Internet Explorer. Let's just rip Chrome out because of this reason. You can go in, write that script, deploy it.
I get a good reason. Because Chrome takes up all my CPU and memory cycles on my machine.
Yeah, that's an excellent reason.
all of it. That's an excellent reason. I'm for one, I'm a Firefox user because of that.
Oh yeah, I get that totally.
It's just something that you're able to do, and if you can script it, you can deploy it, and that's what we like to ask our customers. We've talked about this. What would you work with? Because that's ultimately what it comes down to. Is you are able to do this now. Something one of the guests brought up something about older systems. Let's talk about Bluekeep for a second. Bluekeep is still prominent in the news. Bluekeep is something that, of course, Microsoft came out with the patch. They deployed it out, or at least allowed people to download manually and deploy it out. For some of our customers, we wrote a worklet to deploy out the patch so that they could patch all their XP machines, but there are certain customers that couldn't do it. So if you know the vulnerability and you know how to change it, so you could script it. So in the case of the RDP vulnerability, we wrote a script to change the default settings on it and allowed those customers to at least stop a little bit of that vulnerability, get a little bit of that patch without changing infrastructure that couldn't be changed.
Well, and I think we should back up for our listeners. Not once you get the Automox agent on your systems, not only can you apply patches to the OS and third-party software, but you can essentially, for whatever operating system, Linux, Mac OS, or Windows, you can write scripts, right, that test for a condition, and then if that condition's true, if I get this right, Richard, correct me, or if I get it wrong, correct me. If it's true, then execute this script. So essentially, you can use it to do whatever you want on your system.
Yeah, it's almost like an if this then that kind of script-based agent that you can build out. So PowerShell and Bash scripting is something that you can easily deploy out and automate. So say you have a password policy that you want installed on every single machine locally. You can just, every machine that gets added into this group, the password policy is pushed out via PowerShell script or Bash script, and it's just automatically done through our process. And it really does come down to this 2 megabit agent sitting on the endpoint is giving IT users the control that they need to harden their systems, to establish solid cyber hygiene.
So I had 2 questions.
Go ahead, Lee.
So one is, we talked about, you talked about having them make a bunch of changes to systems, like getting down to say one installed version of Java or Flash and making it current. Is there still an issue with, I don't know if it's maturity or capability. In other words, no, we can't change it, really has to go by the wayside. We have to be willing to move things forward. Is that a barrier that still has to be overcome, or have folks in general got that figured out, realize we need to keep moving forward?
There's still a fear of the future, in my opinion. I came from an AI ML company that was sold to a large company that makes phones, if you can figure out who that is. And there's still fear when I was out there talking about that product. When I was out there, representing them, there was still fear of what it was. I like this house analogy. Paul, I'm going to steal this in the future.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
If you want, I'll credit you mostly. You're driving through a neighborhood. There's a lot of nice houses. They're well maintained. They're taken care of. But you pull up on that one house that's not maintained, and somebody just goes, "I just like how it is. I don't want to change it. I don't want new grass. I don't want new plants. This is how it is. I don't care that the paint's peeling." There's always going to be that mindset in every element of our lives. And especially in the IT world, some of the pushback that we get from IT people is, if we automate this, I'm out of a job. And it's fear. It's fear that change is going to make them obsolete. And I challenge that and say, wouldn't it allow you to focus on bigger and better things? Go take a SONS class, go take ICAA classes, get out there and really dive into what can help you grow as an employee.
Well, and Richard, I really think that path is understanding what's available in the cloud and automation and containers and that whole. I mean, Amazon alone, leave Google Cloud and Azure out of it for a moment. Amazon alone has so many new services and products that could really help the IT infrastructure move in a different direction. The one thing I think we lack today is education about all of these. Yeah. So now add in the other, platforms. If you're automating yourself out of a job, that gives you time to go learn about and then build the next iteration of your applications and your infrastructure, right? That when you tie that back, everything that I've read, researched, and talked with people, when you tie that back, enables the business to operate more efficiently, and if you do it right, more securely than ever before, right? So you're really enabling the business by automating those processes. That's, I think, how we have to spin it to folks. By automating those processes, you can go learn stuff that's basically going to make your company better, that's going to make it more efficient and essentially more secure, again, if you do it right. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, but yeah.
So there's one other pushback that I've run into, and that is when we're sitting here and we're cyber and we want to add a tool like an Automox, an agent on a system that's going to help us with the security, we get the we've got this many agents, this much of the CPU is just consumed by agents, and therefore no. Whereas when IT wants to put something on, that conversation doesn't happen.
Well, if you remove Chrome from all the systems, Lee,
Yeah.
you've got so many
Well, I
more
could-
CPU cycles. It's great. It's fine.
That would make huge resources available just getting rid of that one product. But I was just wondering, is that something that's narrow to my scope, or is people
No, it's
still
valid.
pushing
No,
back on
no.
agent?
It's
Very
a valid
valid.
point. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
How do you deal with that, Richard? Because I mean, I've dealt with that as a product marketing manager in the past, right? Agents are like, you say the word agent, and man, the reaction is just
It's fear.
Vicious.
It's
Vicious. Yeah.
disgust. Like, oh my God, I'm going to have another icon on my computer. I can't believe this.
How
It's
dare you?
How dare you make my computer worse?
it's true though. It is.
I don't like the word agent, at least in the case of us. I lost this battle, but I like to call it a sensor because all it is gathering data and sending it out up to the cloud management console, and that's all it's doing. And then it's receiving the command to download the patch. That's it. It's a 2 megabit agent that sits on the endpoint, but the user will never know. There's no desktop icon. There's no start button. There's nothing for them to see. It's hidden. So it's more of a sensor, like an EDR sensor in terms of the.
Now, Richard, hold on. I think, just interjecting quickly, I think that the AV industry early on really kind of spoiled it for everyone with an agent because they put software on endpoints that would run a scan in the middle of the day, suck up all the resources, let the user interact with it, and do all kinds of things that just made a horrible experience. I think that I won't call it agent, right? The software that you deploy to run on endpoints, for example, today is so much better. We've learned so much. It doesn't get in the user's way, and it doesn't impact the system as a whole in any capacity.
We hope we've learned something. There's
Right.
plenty of examples of organizations that haven't learned enough. We have all these products on our machine, but if you have a small product that's not using a lot of resources, it's not using a lot of memory, that does one scan, has an understanding, and then just does a perpetual scan as things come down and things change, then all of a sudden you're not using a lot of resources in the middle of the day. You're not impacting the workability of the user. What you're doing is you're just keeping that data up to date. It's a constant audit almost that allows the IT manager to take control of the environment no matter where the endpoints are. And there's the other big thing is that as we become more mobile, I work remote 2 days a week. I don't VPN into the office because I don't need to. My IT team can directly see the software that's on my endpoint and make any changes that they need to without me ever having to call home. Now, all of a sudden, that practice of VPNing in, you can remove the VPN. You can remove some of that software that you had to do Global Connect and all that was using resources and just have this one simple product. And that's where we take it down to is like, let's do consolidation of some of your services down to one simple software and one simple agent that gets installed there. Yeah, you're right. The AV industry really screwed it for a lot of us. But in the end, we're already selling a lot of products on our machines, 10 products in general is the average. So why not one more or remove Chrome and just save the world?
Dude,
Wow,
that's
this
a
Chrome
great
love fest.
t-shirt. I want remove Chrome and save the world. That's a
I was
t-shirt,
hoping
right?
that my Vulnerability Wednesday t-shirt had arrived in time for the show, but it didn't.
That's awesome.
That's perfect. Well, the other piece you hinted on there though is also instead of scanning full time all the time, we've added the maturity of scheduling and being able to say, look, these things can only be touched between 2 and 3 in the morning, and these things are game 24/7, and building some confidence that you're not going to go scan Joff's desktop right in the middle of his pen test. That sort of maturity layer also plays into it. I'm assuming orchestration and timing and stuff is a key component in your product.
Well, it's also it's not just the scanning component, but it's also the deployment side. If you're in the middle of a webinar and all of a sudden the little box pops up and says, "Hey, we're going to install an update right now," just going to go, "Oh crap!" and it just does it. In some cases, the product forces it through. So you work with your local your local user's schedule. We built this product around the idea that you have a mobile workforce. So I could take this machine, I could go to Europe, and if the IT administrator here in Colorado says, hey, we're going to deploy out this patch at 5 p.m., it's not going to be 5 p.m. Colorado time. It's going to be 5 p.m. of wherever I am. It's the local machine time that defines it. So deploy it outside the work element. You send a notification. Hey, would you like to deploy this patch now or later? You can select. You can even give the user control to say, I'm going to wait 1 hour. You can give them limits. You can delay it 3 times, whatever it might be, until it's forced through. And that gives the IT or the user a little bit of control over their endpoint, but the IT administrator confidence that it's happening. Hey, they've gone through their 3 chances. It's being deployed out. We're confident that it's been deployed within the last 24 hours.
And I love that, Richard, for a lot of reasons. One is we have that exact scenario. And it's actually one reason why we went with Automox, because we do produce a webinar. And when we're doing a webinar, like for that hour, everything stops. Like you're not deploying an update during our webinar, right? And it was one of the things was not just the multi-platform support, not just the capabilities to apply patches, but it was that management, that window where we could say for the dozen or so systems that run the shows, like we know when downtime can happen and we know when it can't happen. Very definitively, we know that, right? And so we have a very structured when we deploy patches to our infrastructure, when I and our dev team deploy new updates to our website, new updates to our publishing software, we know when the critical times are, right? So any software that we adopt as Security Weekly has to be able to know that from us. We have to define that for the software. So like Thursday evenings is not a time to deploy new software. When we're doing a webcast, not a time to deploy new software. Other times, totally fine, right? And we know the gaps in our publishing schedule to say, if you do it on a Wednesday night, that's cool because the next show is not happening till 6 p.m. on Thursday. That gives us all day Thursday to deal with whatever fallout might happen, and that's our biggest window. And that's just a shining example of enterprises today, right? Like what the schedule is based on what you're doing as a business, essentially.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
so
I mean,
2
it's
o'clock
just-
on Thursday is good for installing Chrome?
No,
Yeah,
you uninstall Chrome. It's always uninstall Chrome, right?
Always.
But
Sorry,
I do
Richard.
have to say on the Chrome front, it's how I can justify faster processes for everyone, myself included. Because I got to run Chrome. That means I need a 16-core i9, not an 8-core. Because I got to run Chrome.
Chrome's how I heat my
core,
office.
Right? It's 8 cores right there,
right.
at least.
Hey,
More.
gentlemen, I think we just solved global warming.
We did.
Let's
Just
kill
delete Chrome.
Delete Chrome, and we're good.
Delete Chrome.
Wow, brilliant. Brilliant, I tell you.
There goes
All
Google as a
security plans,
sponsor.
saving the planet.
There goes once. Yeah. Just blame me. It's okay.
It's really funny. While we were having that conversation, I'm actually looking at my activity monitor on my desktop, and
Oh yeah.
fucking Chrome.
Chrome.
Love you, Google, but
That's another T-shirt. Chrome.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Why does Chrome need?
Well, now in Microsoft Edge, and we all know, if you worked in security and were involved with vulnerabilities, and you had to deal with Internet Explorer, like you just want to cry. I mean, just even like thinking about Internet Explorer 6, like I just want to cry. Like it was so awful in terms of security. The latest version of Edge uses Chromium. Did I say that? Chromium as the framework underneath.
Right.
So I'm kind of wondering, like, what did Microsoft do? Like, is it like Mozilla's implementation, or Google's implementation of Chrome that causes all the performance issues? Is it add-ons that make it even worse, or is it the Chromium framework itself? And are we going to see the same performance like atrocities that we see with Chrome that we're going to see the same ones with Microsoft Edge? Because they just had a bug bounty announcement. They're working with Google to, if you find something that's related to Chromium, there's stuff in the bug bounty program about that, right? Because they're basically building it on that framework. So like I wonder, is performance going to be any better on the new version of Edge? I don't know. Probably not.
If only there were technical people that you could turn to and ask.
I'm sure there's, and we have a good relationship with Microsoft. They're awesome, by the way. Their employees are awesome. The company, their PR, they're just great to deal with. there are people, you're right, Richard, that can answer that question. Like, how did you, because I'm sure there was a group of people at Microsoft that were like, look, this is the next version of Edge, and they were modeling the performance and going, oh, crap, like, how do we make this better, right? Like, Microsoft's one of the largest software companies in the world. There's a whole team of people that were dedicated to that, for sure, right?
You bring up a really good point. It's over at the Microsoft shop, I'm sure when they were developing this, they're like, we already are, we're already kind of at a behind on this kind of stuff. Everyone already makes fun
Right.
of us.
Yep.
So what do we do to get ahead of this? They are not going to just repeat what Chrome is doing, hopefully, because if they do, no one's going to turn to Chrome and be like, oh, look, Chrome's taking up all your memory too, all your resources too. They're going to just go, oh, look, Microsoft still can't build a browser. And that's, they had to have done something different. I'd be very interested in seeing what they did.
Agreed.
Yeah. One of the killers on Chrome,
Valve.
the only reason I'm still running Chrome on this particular machine is I have one service I use that won't work in Safari and won't work in Firefox. But
Yeah,
the damn
that's
thing
true.
keeps working in Chrome. That didn't used to be the case. Earlier versions, well, upgrades happen. So, but other than that, I was hardly, before that happened, I was never using Chrome. I just had it as an emergency browser in case something else didn't work. Oh well. I'm hoping they can make Edge a better product. My biggest complaint with Edge has been it's incompatible with too much stuff. It didn't work right in Edge, so I revert to IE.
And and that's the amazing thing, and that ties Lee directly into the patching issue that we're talking about, right? And I don't necessarily blame the software developer. In fact, I have so much more empathy for software developers, having done it basically full time for the past 2 months, right? It's like, I don't know whose fault it is or how we came to this thing where you can write an application and it works in one browser, not the other, right? Works in one iteration of the OS and not the other. Whose fault is that? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter because it complicates patching, right? If I patch the browser or patch the OS that gets a new browser, now my app is broken. Richard, as you well know, like that slows down people's patch deployments significantly. Yeah. And I mean, blaming and the ownership game doesn't help us any further, right? Like, I think we need to focus on the solution. How do we adopt frameworks and methodologies that allow us to write software that doesn't get broken by an OS or a browser update, right?
Ultimately, things do get broken. You sometimes have to do a rollback of a patch. It controls. You did your test. You did your due diligence as an IT administrator. You went in. You did your due diligence. You deployed it out, and all of a sudden something happened that you weren't prepared for. I need to pull it back. You can do a mass rollback of a patch if you need to, in any case, and take that back and allow your machines to get back up and running while you try to figure that out. But the industry as a whole, I think in some cases, when you see a little bit better testing, there's a lot of fear from when patches weren't tested as much. And that fear led to this element where we surveyed our recent webinar attendees, how long they're waiting, like what is their real-time patch management. And some people are saying over 30 days. 30 days from the date that the patch is released to the point that they are deploying it out, because they're concerned about what else. And if you look on Reddit, Spiceworks, Twitter, all those communities, people are saying, I'm just going to wait for the community to tell me if this is good or not. We shouldn't be just at that element. Yes, there should be a community conversation. I think that's pushing the developers to kind of do a little bit of better QC on that side.
I know, but it's hard. Like, even if I write the code, right, and then I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to bed, wake up the next morning. I'm going to put myself in the user's shoes. I'm going to test my software, right? I'm going to write scripts as I go that test my software. I'm confident I'm going to push the release out. You haven't been doing software development. You haven't pushed that out. And a user just, in the data they're working with, coupled with the user, finds this scenario where you're like, I don't even know how I would have found that before. Yeah. Like, now I know, but like, before that happened and the user came up with this weird scenario, and Mark is awesome at this, coming up with this scenario going, I'm like, I don't even know how I would have thought of that on my own, but like, dude, you broke it. And I'm like, you legit broke it. I go fix my code, and that's cool. But like, those scenarios, and now you extrapolate that out into millions, and I have 8,000 lines of code, millions and millions of lines of code, right? And then you look at Microsoft that has 1 million or plus customers that are testing their code. Like, someone's going to find a scenario where that breaks for them.
Yeah, and it's right now it's not going to be perfect, and I wish it was.
Right.
I have an example of just, we were talking plugins. I have a plugin installed in Firefox that breaks web pages all the time. I think I find a bug, say like on a discourse community. I was like, oh, I found a bug, and I submitted it, and they're like, what's going on? Like, we've never seen this before. And I was like, oh, it's this, and this, and this. And we go through the test, and I realize it's this one plugin that's killing a certain element in there. It's like, this is something discourse had not seen before. And so that's exactly what you're saying, but on the larger scale. So it's not perfect. And it's not the fault of the software developers themselves. They are being notified of the patches. The ones that have, and the bug bounty programs are participating in bug bounty programs. That's great. They're opening it up. They're welcoming those vulnerabilities to come in. They're supporting the community, the people who are able to apply that from a user's perspective, the people who are able to focus in and say, here's how I'm going to break it in this certain element, or this script is going to do this. I think that's going to help continue to drive it forward.
Oh boy, just writing software is hard.
It is not.
I don't
easy.
envy you.
Right, Joe. I mean, you've both, been on the pen tester side and breaking stuff and writing software. Writing software is way harder, in my opinion, dude. Like, making shit work is way harder than trying to break into it. No,
there's a really big difference between proof of concept and production quality ready. Software.
Yes.
Huge difference.
Huge. Because I'll do that a lot of times. I'm like, this is sort of working the way I want, and then like I got to give it to Jack or one of our other developers. Like, now, like, make this like production ready, right? Like, I can get the requirements, and like this is what we want, right? But then there's like those extra steps that are making it production ready. That's the hard part, right? And regression testing, I think, is really largely, I think, what we're talking about when it comes to patches, especially, is regression testing. And doing a full regression test is not easy. It's just not, for all the reasons we talk. User has a different plugin installed in their browser. How do I account for that in my testing? I mean, it's not necessarily, it could be a regression testing, right? I modified this other functionality, and then this other functionality doesn't work because the user has a plugin installed that was impacted. Like, those scenarios are hard.
Well, plus, and I think the expectations are just so high these days too.
They are.
Like, why won't it work with my toaster? I got 28 plugins. What's the problem with that?
Yeah.
It's like, you just can't.
I mean, I don't want to be all doom and gloom either. I mean, there's software that works really well that I think plays into those expectations, Joff, right? Like, not all software is created equal, and some software works really great, and that forms expectations when it works great like that. So when users adopt other software and it's not perfect, it's not as good, expectations are pretty high, because we do have some quality software out there today versus what we had maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, right?
So I think that's a message to everybody, right? I mean, quality software, everybody else raise the game.
That's
right?
it. Step up your game.
Yeah.
Write good software. That's not easy.
Absolutely.
It's not easy.
Absolutely. It should be easy. No, it's really not. And I don't envy those that have to do it. But I think you bring up really good points of the user expectation. We buy a brand new phone and we turn it on and it works. We open up a brand new laptop, we turn it on, it works. I remember getting my first 386 machine and having to configure the operating system. I don't even remember what it was running. I remember installing NT server on machines and just having to go through configuration after configuration.
From floppies, right? Well, was Windows NT or was it Windows 351 for workgroups, or both, that was on floppies you had to install?
Both,
right? You could install it from
server
floppies.
Was on floppies. I remember this was 2003 in the military.
It was a fucking stack of floppies.
Yeah.
Nuts.
But to Richard's point, right? You can go to Best Buy right now and you can buy a Chromebook and fire it up and it works, right?
Yeah.
Big difference.
So
the world has changed. I think the consumer also needs to be patient.
Yeah.
Because as technology has gotten more complicated, as technology has gotten more advanced, and these elements, these little connections and plugins, and everything that we are all relying on. I mean, I love the idea that my phone is more powerful than all the Apollo computers that sent us to the moon combined.
Sure.
That's incredible to know. And I use it to look up memes and make calls and text people.
That's what I use my phone for, Richard. Exactly
Absolutely.
that.
That's
And
what
in
they're
that
for.
order, too. Like, I
Exactly.
got to get memes, I got to get text messages, and maybe some phone calls. But that's the
Exactly.
order of operations.
But the technology has gotten more advanced, and me as a consumer, when something doesn't work,
Yes.
I'm frustrated, and I
So
work
mad.
in this industry.
Got to get my
It's-
memes.
Exactly. Like, oh my God, Reddit's not loading. What will I do with my time? But we go down to the element of, if something doesn't work, you deploy out a patch and something's not working. Oftentimes the user just goes to the IT administrator, like, you broke it. I can't believe you. And the IT administrator's getting yelled at all the time. So they go to the manufacturer, like, I can't believe you guys are idiots. You guys deployed out a bad patch. And then we post up all these bad reviews. That's not helping.
But what I love, Richard, you
What
said,
happens?
and Joff was laughing too, because you said, like, users just need to have more patience. And damn it, anyone that uses my software, I'm like, look, I'm pushing. I say this every time. I'm pushing a new release. I'm like, Mark, you gotta be patient, dude. Like, it's my software. Like, I write crappy code. Like, be patient. Like, there's gonna be, like, shit's gonna go bad. Like, I set the expectations low with my software. Rightfully so. Right, Joff? You were laughing hysterically when Richard said it.
I was, because
it's so true.
It is just so true. I mean, it's nice to say, well, you all need to have a little bit more patience, but the fact of the matter is, the industry with its evolution has set that expectation level higher and higher and higher. People are just seeing their machines like toasters now. If it doesn't work, then what's wrong with people? Or, they just didn't do the right thing, and yeah, people don't have that patience anymore.
I have a question for everybody. Do you think that the element of the disposable device has also played the impact into our lack of patience towards things working?
Yeah, I agree, Richard, because like back in the day, technology and computers especially were expensive, right? Thousands of dollars for me, that 386, that 486. We laughed today. That was like thousands of dollars back in the day. And like, if that shit didn't work, like, you were on the phone with tech support.
You made it work.
Was back then, dude. It was before much of the internet, right? You were maybe on BBS's, and we talked about this in an interview with Black Hat too. Like, you went to like local computer meetups and talked to your friends and be like, I'm having this problem getting this game to load on DOS. Like, what do I need to do, right? And I think two things make people spoil today. One, how cheap stuff is. If one thing doesn't work, like, whatever, if it's old, I just go buy a new one. Like, a Raspberry Pi is like, what, $35 or what? Like, I'll just go buy a new one, right? Or go buy some different piece of technology to solve my problem. Number two, if it doesn't work, I'm going to go on the internet and bank on that there's like hundreds, thousands of people that maybe ran into this same problem and have posted, like, here's how you fix it. And that shit didn't exist 15 or maybe 20 plus years ago, right?
So troubleshooting has also changed. I mean, nowadays, back then, well, let's go back to the 486, 386 machines, back when we were building our own towers.
Yeah.
I was 14 years old, building my own computer, and I had to learn through those computer meetups. My dad would drive me down to the computer meetup, and here I am in a room full of random people just kind of going, I don't know what I did wrong. And it turns out, it's a little plug on the BIOS or something.
Yeah, someone that's done it before.
Element. But if I want to, let's take it back to the phone. If I want to diagnose this, it's all programming. It's all code.
Yeah.
And I get frustrated with that because that's not my element. That's not something I'm comfortable with, having to go in and change settings and, reconfigure this and do this. I like the physicality.
You know what's cool, Richard, is that my oldest son's 11, right? And one of his summer reading was a biography of Steve Jobs. And they talked about how Steve and Woz created the company back in the day, and they went to local computer meetups to showcase their technology. That was like one of the first, like basically one of the first working personal computers. And the way they got other people interested in shared ideas was going to those local computer meetups. Yeah. It wasn't like I did, a blog post online or like whatever. Like, I had to go meet with people. That was the only way to showcase it was the only way to ask someone a question was to go meet with them.
Yeah, I stand by that. That is still the personal element of marketing, and that's my forte. Is I love technology, but the personal element of education. That's why the SANS classes are so popular, especially in a sea of conferences that are a little watered down and not as educational as they could be. You have these educational courses where you can go out with peers and start asking these questions and
Agree. Yes.
with vendors and actually ask them the difficult questions. I challenge that. We go to meetups as much as we can, and we love the questions that we receive in person because it's challenging us to not only think on our toes, but to understand what they want, what the consumer is going to want. And so being the company size that we are, we're able to be agile, take that into account. And on top of that, there's a little bit of the community aspect where you are beta testing a community for all right now, where people can come and talk about cyber hygiene, talk about Automox patching, and not even if they're users, they can just come join that conversation to foster this element of connectivity and support that allows us all to get to the end game of comfortable and secure with our devices.
Mm-hmm. Richard, we just have 5 questions for you.
Okay.
We do this game called 5 Questions with Security Weekly. We, on purpose, did not prep you for this.
Sweet.
And
I can't wait.
Now, to ease your fears, Richard, there are no right or wrong answers.
Well, that's not completely
There's
true.
only 5 questions, and one of them is multiple choice, and there's only 2 possible answers. And even if your answer is outside of those, it's still technically never correct, or incorrect or correct. So,
Okay.
But you're probably going to be wrong anyway.
Yeah.
we don't judge. I mean, Joff might, but like with the rest of us, we don't.
What do you mean, Joff might? I won't judge.
No, we don't judge. We don't judge.
Can I ask a question, Jeff? What are you wearing a Black Hills security?
Yes, Joff works for Black Hills Security. Yes,
I am.
That's right,
Yeah,
that's right.
right.
I love that podcast. I'm going to just say that, and I love the book behind you, Paul.
Active countermeasures. Yeah, offensive
countermeasures.
security.
Tribe of Hackers.
Offensive countermeasures.
From
Yeah,
Marcus.
The tribe.
The tribe of hackers.
Tribe of hackers. Yes, Tribe of hackers.
So if you love that so much, you should come out to Wild West Hack and Fest because that's Black Hills Conference, and we have a really, really good time.
It's not that far from Colorado, right? Like
it is not that far, right? We're up in South Dakota. It's a long way for me, but not really that bad.
I actually don't. It's funny, Richard. Before we get into 5 questions, because we have the liberty of time, because we're doing awesome on this. Our first segment was short, and we're gonna get it pre-recorded. So, Richard, you benefit from having more time with, and we benefit from having more time with you. So it's awesome. But John Strand and I don't remember how we met. We met somewhere at a SANS conference. He was in like a suit. He was teaching a management class or something. I don't know. We just kind of hit it off.
Was in a suit? Wow.
He was in a suit. And I was like, dude, why are you wearing? And we just hit it off. And I don't know how we got talking. He was like, dude, you should come present at a SANS conference. So like I flew out to New Orleans and John recommended me. And I'm like, well, John's like a certified SANS instructor. So like I better not screw up, right? And all my friends at SANS, Mike Poor and Josh Wright, they hazed me in the presentation.
Of course they did.
Right. And I think I did all right because they asked me back and whatever. And John and I got friendly. And John was like, went through this like podcast thing and all their people asking me in their podcast. I'm like, dude, you got to do our podcast. Like, I'm not going to let you go do it. Like, you got to do ours. Like, here is your home. And John did. We merged companies. We did a lot of consulting together. We created a startup together, and now, John and I have just been kind of, side by side ever since. Basically, John hosts Enterprise Security Weekly with us. So we have a very rich history. John does a great conference in South Dakota every year. So we've got a very close relationship with Black Hills.
October 22nd is the date. Starts Tuesday through Friday. And yes, I do work for Black Hills. And yes, I have spent a lot of time with Paul lately. Probably more than John has. But
probably,
anyway.
Yes. I'm like, Joff, we need to talk about Python. John one day goes, I'm going to hire this guy, Joff Thayer. I'm like, dude, never heard of him. John's like, he's awesome. I'm like, cool. Can he be in the show? John's like, absolutely. And Joff has been a friend and a true asset ever since then. So, You hit on a relationship that is very, very near and dear to our hearts, Richard. So yeah.
Good.
So now, Richard, we want to learn. Yeah, we want to learn about you. So here are 5 questions for you, my friend. The first of which is 3 words to describe yourself.
Loud, obnoxious, and personable.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Thought about this. Probably an axe. If you're going to go out strong.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Loud, obnoxious, and personable.
In the popular, I like that. It's efficient. In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
Second.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Otherwise, oh, Johnny. Nice.
What was that?
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Keanu Reeves.
Whoa.
Yeah. How do you match that?
And if anyone messed with your dog growing up,
Oh no.
Yeah. I would do Keanu Reeves and Cindy Crawford.
Beautiful.
Dude, Cindy
Beautiful
Crawford
choices.
was like, when I was growing up, she was like the teenage boys, but like everyone knew Cindy Crawford.
What
right?
he's saying is she was his, laundry sock material.
I just want you. I'm getting a really strange look over here from my like, what are you guys talking about?
Totally fine. Tell it.
Just for the record, it was not Richard.
Okay.
Richard answered the questions genuinely and did a great job. Richard, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you inviting me on. I look forward to coming back.
Absolutely. Anytime, Richard. With that, we'll take a short break. We're going to come back with 2 pre-recorded interviews. One is with Recorded Future, and the other is with Versec. So stay tuned.